Antarctica is bigger than Europe, bigger than the continental United States, and you are not allowed to live there. Not because it's too cold, not because it's too remote, but because an international treaty made it illegal. 7 countries once filed competing territorial claims on it, and every single one of them lost. So how does an entire continent end up legally off limits, and who exactly made that call? Now here's where this gets genuinely strange. 7 countries looked at the same frozen continent and each decided, independently, that it belonged to them. Picture a pie, one pie. 7 people each draw their own slice, and several of those slices cover exactly the same piece. That's not a metaphor. That's the actual map of Antarctic territorial claims. Argentina, Chile, and the United Kingdom all staked overlapping wedges on the same stretch of the Antarctic Peninsula. The same ice shelf was simultaneously owned by 3 different governments. There was no arbitration, no court ruling, just 3 flags planted in the same snow, each country insisting the others were wrong. And it wasn't just the peninsula. Australia claimed the largest single slice, roughly 42% of the entire continent. France claimed a narrow strip. Norway claimed 2 separate, non-contiguous sections. New Zealand took a wedge on the Pacific side. Together, these 7 nations carved up a landmass larger than Europe and then had absolutely no way to do anything about it. That's the part that makes this absurd. Antarctica has no indigenous population to govern, no ports to tax, no roads to patrol. Asserting sovereignty over it was the geopolitical equivalent of claiming the moon, you could say the words. But enforcement was fantasy. You can't collect customs duties from a glacier. What made the stakes real was what sat underneath all that ice. Beneath the sheet lie estimated reserves of coal, iron ore, and offshore oil deposits. This wasn't a symbolic argument over a barren rock. It was a territorial standoff over one of the last untouched resource frontiers on Earth. By the late 1950s, that standoff had become genuinely dangerous. 12 nations, including the United States and the Soviet Union at the peak of Cold War tension, looked at the overlapping claims, the unenforceable flags, and the resource pressure building underneath, and reached a conclusion that almost never happens in geopolitics. Nobody wins. The only solution was to agree that no one could. 7 countries planted flags in the same ice and still walked away with nothing. So which claim do you think was the boldest? Argentina and Chile fighting over their own backyard, or Australia quietly grabbing 42% of the whole continent? Drop your answer in the comments below, because what happened next, the moment 12 nations actually sat down together, is where this story gets really interesting. In December 1959, 12 nations signed the Antarctic Treaty in Washington. The same 12 that had watched the United States and the Soviet Union stare each other down across the ice during the Cold War's peak tension. And the agreement they reached was almost philosophically strange. Nobody wins. No one gains new territory. No one loses what they claimed. Every existing claim is simply frozen in place, legally suspended, neither recognized nor erased. No action taken while the treaty is in force can be used to assert or deny territorial sovereignty, and no new claim can be made. The continent is designated exclusively for peaceful scientific research. What it produced in practice is roughly 90 research stations scattered across the ice, the only human presence the continent permits. The scientists who winter over there are not residents. They are temporary visitors on rotation. It remains the only example of a single treaty that governs an entire continent. One document, one continent, 60+ years of compliance. That almost never happens in geopolitics. Then, in 1991, the treaty grew teeth. The Protocol on Environmental Protection, signed in Madrid and entered into force in 1998, designated Antarctica as a natural reserve devoted to peace and science, and prohibited all activities relating to mineral resources except for scientific research. No drilling, no extraction, nothing. But here's the part that keeps geopolitical analysts awake. After 2048, any consultative party may request that a conference be held to review the operation of the protocol. The mining ban doesn't automatically expire before 2048. Changing it requires unanimous agreement of all consultative parties. After 2048, a review conference can be called, but removing the mining ban still faces enormous procedural hurdles, including ratification by 3/4 of all consultative parties. With Arctic sea ice retreating and resource competition accelerating globally, the pressure building toward that date is already visible. Russia's oil and gas seismic surveys in Antarctica have triggered international attention, and that's still 22 years before anyone can formally call for a review. So here is the full answer to the question this video started with. Antarctica isn't off limits because nobody wants it. 7 countries wanted it badly enough to plant overlapping flags and argue for decades. It's off limits because the world's nations looked at a continent with no owner and decided for once that keeping it that way was worth more than winning it. That agreement has held for over 60 years. Whether the pressure of the 2048 window finally breaks it is the question the next generation of diplomats will have to answer. Subscribe if you want more like this, and watch this one next.